All right. VueJS Amsterdam. How are you feeling? Yeah, that's the spirit, folks. That's the spirit. And you see right here nothing, because I want to start with a very easy question. Now, you all had lunch. It was tasty, right? You all had a full belly now, I hope? So yes, perfect. So who of you actually writes composables up here, right? Okay. We'll do the other way around. Who's still using Options API? A few people. Yeah, here's some views. Yeah, some views also. Okay, great, lovely. I mean, that's perfectly fine, but who of you writes good composables, actually? Who thinks that? 4 or 5 hands. We have to talk after this talk, okay? If you know all the shit here. Right? Great. Okay, so now let's talk about the composable handbook, is how I would call it here, because we all should stop writing bad composables. I mean, it sounds a bit easier than it is. Otherwise, I could just say, like, okay, here are the docs, and that's it, right? But that's not what we're here for. Not at all. So a few words about me. I'm Alex. I'm a web engineering consultant. I am, speaker, instructor, podcast host. Anyone, any Deja Vu fans in here? A few people. Yeah, otherwise, check it out. The only English-speaking running Vue podcast at the moment with amazing guests. So yeah, don't miss it out. Also, yeah, on the Nux team, I do some videos every now and then. Thanks. I have a website as well, and yeah, let's talk about the agenda, because, well, first of all, I want to talk about the mission, right? We have a handbook, so our mission is why composables. Then the foundation, what is a composable? Organization-wise, like where, and also what to put in there, actually, right? And of course, we want to lead by example, so we take a look at examples from people actually doing that day by day. And last but not least, the best practices part, like how do you actually write good composables? Because it's not as easy. Okay, and there are a few more things we can go through later on, right? So if you find me afterwards having some questions around that, feel free to do that. But actually, we will have to focus on a few parts. So let's just focus on these, right? Don't have infinite time. Okay, why composables? AKA, what's wrong with the Option API? The answer is nothing. Nothing is wrong with the Options API. It's been the identity of VueJS for a while, and it won't go away. So everybody that's comfortable with the Options API, don't worry, it will be fine. We heard it multiple times. It's a common question, but the Options API is here to stay. Low overhead, that's like it's there, it's implemented on top of the Composition API, actually, not the other way around, with little overhead, so it's fine. But the Composition API, well, first of all, it's future-proof. Hey, to all people who want to use Vapor mode, right? Also, there are a lot of packages out there that might not have a way to deal with them in the Options API, so you have to use a little bit of the Composition API. Also, please don't mix them, right? In the component, at least. Ideally, also not in project, but I know it's difficult. Better TypeScript support, right? Also, now with the Options API and defined component, it is not as bad as it was in the past, but with the Composition API, it's totally fine. You just write JavaScript as you would think, but there are magically types. So great. Of course, it's also easier and more predictable to share code with the Composition API. One of the biggest benefits, besides a few other things we'll learn today. So composables are great for that. It's a bit overused, though, but we'll come to that. And whoever is still dealt with like mix-ins, no worries, these times are over if you use the Composition API. And of course, separation of concerns. We'll talk about that as well. Plus, it's a bit closer to just JavaScript, right? No magic this somewhere, no like interesting options floating around. There's also, of course, there are always downsides, right? There are trade-offs. I'm not saying the Composition API is the silver bullet. We should all do that, but you probably should. Still, it's more difficult to use without good patterns, let's say, best practices, which is also why we're here, right? Separation of concerns. I made a little infographic. I inverted that, so you don't like, white mode. We don't like white mode most of the time. So think about that. In the Options API, you had data. You had props, like your state, right? Then you had watch as a key, and all your watches in there. You had computed, right? Methods, if you still remember that. And lifecycle hooks like mount, before mount, and so on and so on. So you group by these options. But in the Composition API, you say, okay, actually you want to group by feature. So you want to say, well, if I use mouse composable, or like use message, use text, you put a few things of each of these categories in there. Tiny bit of state, possibly, maybe a watcher, maybe lifecycle hook. It doesn't have to be everything, obviously, but you can just reuse these parts and then not group by option, but actually by feature. And, well, if you think about it, in normal JavaScript, that's actually quite similar, or in normal TypeScript. But let's go to the foundation. What is a composable? Anyone could tell me here what a composable is? A few people? A few single hands. Okay, you read the docs, that's great, because the docs say, in the context of Vue applications, a composable is a function that leverages Vue's composition API to encapsulate and reuse stateful logic. Easy, right? We're done. No, of course not, because people usually read that and think, okay, wait, what does it actually mean? So when is a thing a composable? Okay, Vue's API, well, I tried to make it a bit more digestible. We have a checklist, right? It's a handbook, so we need rules, we need checklists, best practices, and if one of these criteria up on the screen in a second is fulfilled, then it's a composable. And you should treat it like a composable, right? Also come to that. So, if your function uses another composable, it's composable. So really simple, right? It's infecting, so to say. If you use a composable, well, you should also treat that function as a composable. Lifecycle hooks, right? If you use API, if you use lifecycle hook, it's a composable, easy. The reactivity API, ref, reactive, computed, composable. And often neglected, dependency injection. If you use that, provide inject. Same idea. Okay, 4 easy things. And what would be a handbook if we wouldn't have some examples? So let's just think of example number 1 here, right? We have a function, interval function. We have like a bit of TypeScript. If you're not into TypeScript, ignore the types, that's fine. A clean function, and so on, and some lifecycle. So now we just do a simple check. Who of you thinks this is not a composable? Hands up. All right, we do the other way around. Who of you thinks this is a composable? Hands up. Hands up, okay. I see a lot of hands. Great, you've seen the last slide. I'm happy about that. This is a composable. It's actually adapted by, from Vue. So why is it composable? Well, we have lifecycle hooks. On-mounted, on before unmount. Easy peasy. Great. Okay, next one. Awesome. Composable, possibly number 2, right? Okay, on user speaks German. We have something with like navigator languages. We have some checks, some local storage, something else here, and then we return true. Okay, we try again. Who thinks this is not a composable? Okay, we try our way around. Who thinks this is a composable? Okay, a few hands up there, I see. Most of them said no. And to be fair, this is a bit of a tricky one because it depends on what something else would be here, right? It depends, it depends. But in that case, if it's just this part, then no, it's not a composable. We don't check any of these boxes, no lifecycle hooks, no provide inject, no reactivity. We just query the local storage to get something and yeah, check. This is actually for my website, really funny to just show like, hey, I also speak German, not only English. If people actually have the German language in their browser settings, right? So it's fun. Okay, but of course, if you do something else there that might be, usually I would suggest, okay, this is like a very simple utility function. Just extract it, use it whenever you need. You can use it in a composable, but yeah, it's not one like that. Number 3, also ignore the naming, right? We all know composables should start with use, but in this case, we just say, okay, if it's a composable, we add the use, otherwise not. So we have a function called user. The user here, some history, some fetching function, some stuff. And once again, we do the same. Who thinks this is not a composable? Okay, who thinks this is a composable? Okay, most of you think that's a composable. Very good, very good. We're learning so fast here, guys. That's amazing. Yeah, and why is it composable? Anyone can tell me? Ref, wonderful. Yes, ref, computed. We have some reactivity. Perfect. Great. And one more. Yeah, it's not a mistake. These are 3 lines. What do you think? Is this a composable or not? A composable? Hands up. Okay. Someone said nope already. Okay, good. we know. Yeah, that's not a composable. We don't use any Vue-specific APIs. There's nothing stateful here. It's just a very simple export of, well, that formatter. Okay, great. Then we know at least what composables are. Sometimes it's, of course, a bit more difficult. These are some examples, but still. Now that we know what it is, we have to think about, okay, where and also what to put into our composables, because honestly, that's the interesting part. And for that, well, how do you organize your code in vanilla JavaScript or TypeScript or in any other similar language? If you think about it a bit more, you usually put code together that belongs like to the same concern or topic or feature, right? So you co-locate that thing. And then you start writing your code, and you start writing 10, 50, 100 lines, and then you have like this gigantic block of code. But luckily, there is something called a function, right? So you use functions to group parts of code that belongs together. You encapsulate them. Sometimes you want to say, okay, I have some code duplication, I run it twice, and you write functions. So It's kind of what you all do in JavaScript or TypeScript, I hope, that you shouldn't write like 500 lines just like that. It's maybe not that maintainable. And of course, then you want to use these functions and other functions. So we have functions, calling functions, calling functions. So simple composition. I don't have to tell you that, like we're all developers, we know. But what I want to ask is, eventually with these layers of, or like levels of abstraction, why don't you all do that in your Vue code as well? Huh? Why not? Okay, look, I have a very simple example for that. Let me scroll up here. It's a bit bigger, I know, it's my component view, only script setup part. I could also live code it now, but time is running. We'll go for it step by step. I also zoom a bit more in. We have some imports, we can ignore that. And what do we do here? We have an original message, we have like an isShown ref, we have an isRandomText shown, isReversed, some reversed message here that apparently is computed and can like reverse the original message, doing that. And then we have a watcher for this isShown. Great. It's always resets that isRandomText shown value to false. If there is no new value, okay, we ignore that. And then we do a 50-50 check. Wonderful. And after the 50-50 check, if it works out, we set isRandomText shown .value to true. Okay, so we have some random text stuff. We have some reversing things. We also have a thing to toggle that reverse. And also a message down here to say if it's reversed, show the reversed message, otherwise the original one. And the first thing, if I look at that code, which I wrote myself for that example, right, but I've seen way bigger components as well, it's like, you don't really see what belongs together here necessarily, right? There are multiple concerns in that component. So we have some things with random text, and we have some things with the message, and reversing that, and showing that apparently as well true if this is shown. Yeah, so this, we don't have the template part here. That's not that important. It just, well, you can toggle this, there's a VF, and so on and so on. But what I usually suggest, we just go through the things that we've seen. With like, okay, let's start with co-locating code that belongs together, right? So let's do this. Ooh, magic. So what's happening is we move the reversed message closer to the original message. Okay, here's the ref defined, and then oh, there's a computed only based on original message. Why not putting that straight under it? Because it obviously is related. Great. That is reversed also comes after that. We can also add a space here after the toggle reverse, but I want to keep it, well, kind of short. It's quite long otherwise, right? Because, okay, is reversed, fine, toggle reversed, they kind of belong together. And then, with all the things, all the pieces in place, there is a reversed message, and original message, we have our final message we want to put out. And yes, this seems to be a bit overcomplicated for a simple, I send a message, but bear with me, usually you have weird business logic around that, right? And then we have this like text shown thing, so like the other concern, that we say like, okay, fine, is shown, is random text shown, and then we watch this and do our random things. And we show some random text within VF in the template if we want to. Cool. Now, are we done here? No. Very good. Fast answer. No. Perfect. We need a composable, yeah. So what usually people do is, let's create a composable. Let's do this in the next step. And there are a few more things happening here. We have this original message, right? And we start with one composable, use message. Now, we put in this original message. It's actually a very nice pattern. I'll show you in a second. And then out there, we get the toggle reverse and the message, which also means everything that's happening inside that composable, that doesn't matter. The component is none of their business. The component is like, okay, I get something back, the rest I ignore. We have the text shown things, they stay the same. Let's take a look at the use message composable here. First, input, could also be maybe ref, right? So, but I made it a bit more obvious. We can take a ref or just a plain string. And then we say, okay, in case there's no ref, let's transform it to ref to just deal with that, right? There are also easier ways to do that, but still, we take that. And then we deal with all the reversing in there. Once again, if we take a look up here, the only thing that's exposed is toggle reverse and the message itself. So the component doesn't have to bother with like, how does it work? We can take a look at the use message composable if we want to know. Also, it's put at the bottom for a specific purpose, because if you want to know what the component is doing high level, we look at the code happening there. If we want to dig into a function a bit deeper, we can have a look. We can jump there or scroll down. Okay, then we have all the reversed things here, right? The is reversed, the toggling, the message, and eventually we return these things. So the cool part is, obviously, if it's actually a ref and something changes, so that's another part of the composables, you should work with reactivity. If you pass in something reactive, then the composable should react to it. So Let's say in this case, yeah, if the message changed, the reverse message should also change, which easily happens if you say, okay, there's a ref, it's fine, we can deal with it. If it's not a ref, it will be always static, it's also fine, and it will simply not update. But that's also a key part, that composables should work with reactivity. And for example, all the composables out there, and a lot of libraries, they do. They accept reactive and also non-reactive values like this. Now, we also mentioned the whole topic of extract composables, right? And usually, when I, for example, give workshops, then people are like, oh, great. I start with a new file called useMessage.ts or .js, and I put this over there. Who of you would say, like, okay, let's extract the composable here, because it's kind of done? A few people, yeah. Okay, so the problem there is, if you would take that out, and it's very specific to that component itself, why? Right? We want to collocate things that are, well, related, that are important for that component. And if you're not planning on reusing a composable, then don't extract it. Then leave it right there where it belongs. It belongs to that component. And this is what people call inline composables. Ooh, crazy. And now we're like, wait, composables are there for extracting, but now just keep them inside the component like you do with helper methods. Just treat them as composables, and then, once again, going back here real quick, call them on the top. And it's also fine to have dependencies. If you say, okay, I need the message from useMessage in another composable, that's all fine. That's not a problem. And I said, yeah, let's do leading by example. And some of you might know this screenshot here, right? Options API, Composition API. In the light mode version, I inverted that. Anyone seen that screenshot so far? Anyone? Yeah, almost everybody. Perfect. So this was also in the RFC for the Composition API, obviously. And it basically shows the groups, right, the color groups by concerns, so like by feature. And I've heard that question like multiple times. People are like, okay, I can zoom in here. It's pixelated, it's hard to read. So what we'll do, we'll jump right in there. Crazy. Which is actually a file that's Evan, that's why leading by example, right, converted for exactly this RFC. It is the right-hand side of that screenshot in that gist. And it's a file that was basically used in Vue CLI back then when Vue CLI was still a thing. It was also still there to look for the options API part. And interestingly, if you think, like, okay, inline composables, that doesn't ring a bell real much. In a way, let's take a look at that file, what's happening. So we have some Vue Apollo, some Vue router, okay, some imports, right? Fine. Okay, some reusable functions, not specific to this component, so extracted composables, right? Use network state, use path utils, and so on, fine. GraphQL, some MISC stuff, and what's that? Network. Const network state equals use network state. Folder, okay, use current folder, and we pass in the network state here. And if we scroll further down, reusable functions specific to this component. Here we have use current folder data. So what was actually right up here. And all the time, all 4 or so years along, this was the pattern people could have followed and probably should. But I know a lot of you don't. So honestly, just give it a try. Don't extract everything straight away. Keep it in there and actually encapsulate your logic into composables. Like, I know, who's actually a fan of OOP here? Are there some OOP fans in here? Some people may, I see the backend folks as well. Great, perfect. Think of a composable also. You encapsulate stuff. It's not like a class. It's more ergonomic. It's reactive. But the same way, okay? Some solid principles can also apply there. Like, why not, right? But you should think about that when creating a component, because I've seen a lot of huge components, like multiple thousands lines of code, and it's really hard to maintain if you just imperatively like write that all the way down. And also, please, if you're more leaning towards the options API, don't start writing like data and then write all your refs, right? Or like, I don't know, watchers and then write all the watchers. Please group them nicely, very nicely, by concern and not really by the type it is. Okay, so we've seen that wonderful file. Let's talk about some best practices, because we all want to know how to actually write good composables. And this handbook comes with some rules, right? And we start with rule 1, don't. Don't write composables. Use views instead, right? So if you think, oh, there's a general purpose composable for a use case, and commonly, if you think a little further, it's like, okay, it's not only me, go to vueuse.org, search if it's there. In like, I don't know, 95%, 95.7% of the cases, someone wrote it, it's tested, open source, it's documented, and it's reliable. So in a lot of cases, like, oh yeah, I want to do something with an interval and reactivity. Yeah, use interval function right in there. Event handler, event listener cleanup, everything's also right in there. No problem. There are a lot of good things right included in VueUse. So please, if you think of like, okay, I can generalize it somehow, maybe there's a good option. VueUse is one of the things that's in so many projects, and it has all the right to be. Also, please give a huge applause to all the contributors to VueUse in this case, because they're doing an amazing job. So big shout out. But now, of course, let's get a bit more real. This is important still, because if you can leverage other libraries that are well maintained, you should, I would say. Okay, rule 2. This is something interesting. Don't make the composables async. Who is regularly dealing with async states in VueJS? Anyone? A few people. So in your Vue component, your Vue SFC, it's fine. You can evade them, right? Then maybe if you use Nuxt, suspense is dealt with, like you're dealing with this under the hood, it's all fine. But if you have a composable that uses another composable, for example, like yours, like you nest them, compose them nicely, and you make one async and then always awaited, you always force, first of all, things to be awaited, so you always end up with asynchronous components even though you don't need to. The other thing is context, right? So don't await your composables instead other composables, because the context might be lost. So the current instance of Vue might be gone because of async nature. In single file components, there's a lovely blog post, by the way, from Anthony Fu about that. In single file components, this is handled by saying, okay, I take the current instance, like I save the context in between, I run an async operation, then restore it. But it only works on top level in single file components, right? In Nuxt, we also do this in like plugins and middleware to basically make sure, okay, the context is still there. And until async context, or like async local storage, doesn't land in JavaScript as an actual feature, this will also take a while until it works. So you might lose context and you deal with like, I don't know, Nuxt instance unavailable. It's a very common problem in that node. Some might be aware of that. So try to make, like, not make them async. Also, there's another pattern, right? We use Vue. So instead of saying, okay, I await until that fetch call is done, let's just say I define a ref, let's say result. It's null by default. I do the fetch call, and whenever the fetch call is done, I set the value of that result all the way to the value, or to the error if there's an error. Maybe I have an extra error ref for that. So you don't really need to await them. You can just make use of reactivity and then say, okay, whenever things change, I can react to that. So that's great. Definitely make sure, take a look that the composables are not async. Unless, yeah, as I said, await them in your SFCs, that's fine. Another one, we talked about context now. Don't call them without context. That's also an interesting one, because composables, people are like, we talked about what a composable is, we need like that use prefix we've seen multiple times, but where to actually use them? So only call them top level and single file components, right? Or in other composables, because, yeah, okay, you have a composable using other composables, and then at some point you go all the way up, and at some point this composable is called in a single file component. So they all have the Vue context, it's all fine, no problem. But also there, please only in other composables top level. Don't say like, oh, my composable, I have a function in that, like a helper function, dare call another composable. No, that's not okay, that won't work. Or it will, and you will have some issues, and things break, and you're not aware of that. Don't call them in event handlers. Please don't say like on-click do things. Please don't do this. Also, please don't call them on the server as like a Nitro instance or whatnot. Doing server-side rendering, different story, we can do that, but Vue composables need a Vue context. And it's not there if the Vue application is not even booted up, right? So this is a very good example, right? We have on-click and say we do some use fetch there, and on-click we fetch some stuff. No, don't do this, okay? Check your code right after, like next break, right? After the other amazing talks, check it, please. Make sure it's not there, otherwise just file an issue. It's like, okay, add that sticker, it's fine. All right, and another one. Another one, this is more to make sure that your composables are actually nice to use, so to say. and are not misused, especially if you work with a bigger team. It's like, okay, someone creates a composable, it works very well, and then people just misuse it everywhere. This is more or less the life of an open source maintainer, just you have your colleagues, right, not the whole world. Also where applicable. So what I mean with this is, let's take a look at another example. And we see here, all right, we have a ref from Vue, we have a function called use notification. I made it a bit easier, right? This is not how we do notifications. But let's say we have a message, and then we have a function called setMessage, or like add notification, or whatever. And then we return both. What is the problem with this composable? Yeah, you can, perfect. You can mutate message, correct. So in this case, it might not be a big drama, but let's say this is a more complex thing. You want to do things when you set the message or add a notification. Yeah, and someone's like, okay, I'll just take message from that composable, say message.value is something else, or message.value push if it's an array or whatnot. You want to avoid that. So you can avoid it in a very easy way. You just make it read-only, right? Also import it from Vue, or if you have auto imports, it's also fine. So make sure that if there's a way, like a set message, to mutate things, then make it read-only. It won't really hurt in this case, especially because then people stop misusing your stuff and use the set message function as cover. Oh, cool. All the extra work I do is already done in that function. Great. And one more rule, because we're slowly going towards the end here. Do not use global refs when using SSR. Who of you is using server-side rendering here? Okay, like 1/3 of the people. You'd be really excited for tomorrow, I guess. Well, yeah, global refs, it's really interesting. Let's take this example. You want to have a global state. Let's say you have a user. Sure, you have a function like a composable use user. You fetch things, and they say user.value, and then you await the fetch call with error handling whatsoever. So this is fine. This works pretty well in a plain Vue SPA. No problem at all. As soon as you do things on the server, you have an issue, because this here is global state. And while you want global state, this is the whole idea. Like, it should be global. I want to have it accessed everywhere, because if I pull it in, it will be a new user every time I call use user. That's a problem. If you do this and call it on the server, that global state will persist throughout multiple calls. So you end up with user A having user B set up, maybe, if you don't fetch it, or if you check things. Horrible errors happening because of that. So what you could do here are two things. First one, you could use Piña, because, well, global state, not a bad idea. Or the second one, if you use Nuxt, just use useState. Pull the user in, say, okay, I use useState. Ideally set it to set a key for that, and then start with, for example, no. And you're all fine. useState will handle all of that. We'll make sure it's transferred over to client as well, so no problem. So please don't use global refs. Also, there are memory leaks. Some of you know how hard it is to debug these, right? Where you have like the RAM is increasing, and then going all the way down like a freefall tower because your server crashed. And it's rebooting. It's not very pleasant to debug, but this is a very common problem, actually. All right, and there are a few more things, but actually we'll come to an end here when it comes to composables. Because, well, as I said, there are a lot of good articles. Also, we have a whole episode, Michael and I, and Deja Vu about that, so definitely listen to that if you're interested. But there's one more thing I want to announce here in a personal matter, because, yeah, some might know us at Nuxt team, some content here and there. But every now and then, it's also time to embark on a new journey. And don't worry, don't go to React or Angular or so. Well, in a way, maybe, because I want to announce that I join Void0 as a DevRel from today on. Yeah, so thanks to Evan and the whole team for the opportunity. And that still means I have a little bit of time for some content, some open source, so I won't go away or anything. But that's that. And if you're ready for more, if you want to follow along, yeah, there's a YouTube channel, video once a week. On Friday, there's the next one. And Deja Vu podcast, if you want to know more about Vite, right, this amazing build tool you're all using, I hope you are. There's an episode with Patak from the team, so with Matthias, coming out tomorrow. Definitely check that out, Deja Vu FM. And yeah, other than that, I just want to thank my sponsors a lot that also allowed me to work on open source in my spare time, so to say. And of course, I want to thank you for your attention. If you have any questions, I'll be around. Just say hi and ask away. Thanks, everybody.